we are again with another campaign lore play. So I'm recording this very late at night. It's 5 to 1 in the morning. I've been to a couple of birthday barbecues. That's right, a couple of them. Why does everyone have to have a birthday the same day? It's ridiculous. Anyway, so I've had a few beers, but I'm still capable of reading a book. So hopefully it won't hamper our progress here. So yeah, we're going to see how things go. So here, jumping into a battle, which we left off in the last episode. So you can see I've brought Volkmar the Grim, because frankly I've got to get Volkmar involved against the vampires. It's very thematic. He's the Grand Theogenist, which basically means he's the head of the cult of Sigmar. So he's the top man with the cult of Sigmar. So yeah, his biggest fan. So unfortunately in the last episode we already wiped out the von Carsteins. And, it would have been nice to introduce the vampires in general at that point, but we're going to have to do it now, now that we're at war with the vampire counts proper, and, trying to get into their lands. So, I've got here, 8th edition Vampire Counts book that I'm going to read from here. So, I'm talking about the vampire counts in general, which I think is a good start. So, the vampire counts. More folklore and legends surround the vampires than any other creature of the night. Since time immemorial, they have been seen as monstrous flesh-eaters, charismatic lords and ladies, and dread generals of the undead. The most powerful of the walking dead, the vampire race was created by unholy ritual and dread elixir many thousands of years ago, which hopefully we'll get into in Total War Warhammer 2. I'm so excited for that. Aren't you guys? It's going to be so good. And obviously I'm assuming Tomb Kings are going to be in it, because the Southlands are in it, and there's going to be a lot of gap in between. Anyway, sorry, I'll get on with this. So, though physically strong, fast and resilient, it is not these qualities that make the vampires such a threat. It is the will and force of personality that drives the vampires to seek great power, a driving force that most other undead creatures lack. Imbued with supernatural control over the dead, vampires make natural leaders for the armies of undead that plague the world. Though loathed and hunted, vampires also lurk within human society, either masquerading as aristocrats or dwelling in haunted citadels on the edge of civilization. All vampires were once human, with hopes, dreams, and families of their own. Even though traces of emotion still stir in their shriveled hearts, the blood kiss has transformed them into monsters without exception. Their once humble aspirations have been consumed, twisted into a desire to conquer and rule over the mortals they left behind. In truth, though, vampires cannot forget their past lives. Their names and heraldic symbols will be emblazoned on their shields and banners of their undead armies. For vampires are proud creatures that revel in the terror they cause. Whether sorcerer or warrior, a vampire's immortal existence is fueled by a craving for magical power and worldly domination. This deadly ambition was writ large during the Vampire Wars. For over a century, the infamous von Carsteins of Sylvania waged war upon the Empire, leading armies of undead the like which had not been seen since the time of Sigmar. 3 successive von Carstein vampires rose to challenge for the rulership of the Old World: Vlad, Conrad, and Manfred, each a unique and deadly threat. Under the command of the vampire counts, hordes of zombies, legions of skeletons, and hosts of other fell undead creatures besieged the Empire in a relentless campaign for control. Divided by politics and war, the Empire was almost overrun and came close to being enslaved to the will of the vampire emperor. It was only through the sacrifices of the armies of the Elector Counts and the efforts of a few remarkable heroes of the Empire that the undead were held at bay. Though the von Carsteins were eventually defeated, persistent rumours claim to this day that the last of the vampire counts, Manfred von Carstein, escaped destruction. For centuries, the tales say, he has awaited... Sorry about that Skype thing, by the way. That's just Microsoft's way of interrupting everything we do, like it does with every update. Seriously, Microsoft, come on, I'm clearly busy, I'm in a game, don't tell me these things. I'm sure you've all been there. Anyway, so for centuries, tales say he has awaited the moment when the Empire is once more weak and vulnerable. When the darkness gathers, the armies of Sylvania will go forth again, greater than ever before. While dead things stir in the graves and travellers disappear in the middle of the night, there is always the fear that one day the vampire counts will rise again, to sweep away the rule of the living and create an eternal empire of the undead. So, a bit of, that's almost folklore, really. That's like a brief summary, but I really like that as an introduction to the vampires. Because I mean, this is very much the introduction to sort of the 8th edition, you know, lore segment in the battle book, and it's just a great, it's just a great introduction to the vampires in general, I feel. So, so we'll move on from there, I think. So before I move on to what I think is either I think it's 4th edition. I haven't looked up the date. It doesn't actually tell you the editions in the battle books. It just tells you the dates, and you have to go on Wikipedia to figure out which edition that is, which is very silly. But yeah, so I think this is 4th edition actually. 4th edition Undead battle book, right? That's Undead. Not Vampire Counts, not Tomb Kings. No, this is before they split them up. This is just generic Undead. This is all the Undead in one battle book, which I think is fantastic. But before I move on to that, I just want to make a point about this army that I brought with me, with the Grand Theogenist. Basically, this is more of a lore-friendly army, right? So basically the state troops, usually, the main thing that the Empire do is they have their armies of sort of state troops, but usually it's halberdiers are the main unit, and that's not really reflected in this game. It's usually swordsmen, right, because they're the cheap basic infantry. But actually, it's usually, it's supposed to be halberdiers are the main one, and then, you know, they're supported by other ones, so usually you have detachments. So they've got detachments of swordsmen, you know, or crossbowmen and things like that. But I wanted to make this thematic with Volkmar as well, so I've got a main core of halberdiers, I've got a load of flagellants, because of course you'd have flagellants. These are all people that are, you know, just compelled to do what they think, you know, Sigmar would want them to do, right? Which is, you know, kill the undead. So they're well up for it. So, so I brought them along. But also, a lot of armies, most armies, are supplemented heavily by free company militia, or any, you know, any sort of, any free company troop. So this could be bowmen. For instance, the archers in Empire armies are actually just huntsmen, right? So they're not professional soldiers, but you get that supplementing armies that are going on campaign, because basically it keeps them out of trouble. Because otherwise they're going to be in taverns causing fights, and they're really useful, disposable, battle-hardened infantry, because they've been on loads of campaigns before. It's how they make a living, you know, when there's a war on. So, so I've got a load of free company militia. Also, I've got some mortars, because you usually have some artillery in Empire Army, so I thought mortars would be a good one to go, because I've been doing a lot of sieges, and I'm sure you noticed they're really good at hitting enemies on walls and stuff like that. Not very good at taking down walls, but you don't need to in this game. You can just scale them with ladders, so that's fine. So, but also I've got Right Guard, which isn't really totally thematic, because the Right Guard are basically the Empire's bodyguard, right? They're the Emperor's bodyguard. So that's not totally thematic, but you would get some cavalry. So in an army like this, you'd probably get maybe Knights Panther, something like that, but they don't exist, so I've gone with Right Guard. So it's a fairly thematic army. And great swords, they're very much the sort of staple, like, ultimate battle-hardened warriors, right? They're the ones that it is a complete... it's just insane to think that one would run away, right? They're supposed to hold the line, and they're, you know, they're seasoned warriors. If it was the Roman Empire, they'd be the Principe, right? They wouldn't be the Hastati. That's just for, you know, people who are into Romans, and also who played Rome Total War. I thought, you know, make that comparison. But yeah, they're the battle-hardened warriors, and you know, for them to run away, that means that the day is lost. So I've got to bring some of them, because they're the best units, and it's a war against the vampire count, so I'm going to bring some. So I think I've spoken enough about the army makeup, but I like to think this is a lot more thematic than the one I've got hanging around with Karl Franz at the moment. Though I am trying to restructure that a bit to make it more lore-friendly, and I'll have access to more units. So hopefully we'll see that, you know, in the next few episodes. Although one thing I would like to add is I would like to add some handgunners to this army, I think. And also I do have a witch hunter en route to join the Grand Theogenist, because the Cult of Sigmar also holds the basically the Order of Witch Hunters, right? They're all Sigmarites. So the idea of the Grand Theogenist, you know, going on campaign without like a warrior priest or a witch hunter seems a bit silly. So I do have a witch hunter en route, and I do want to add a warrior priest at some point. Anyway, but let's get back to the undead, okay? I know the next episode will be undead as well, but still, let's get to it. So, 4th edition undead rulebook. This chapter, the Vampire Counts of Sylvania. So, on the eastern border of Stirland, in the cold shadow of the World's Edge Mountains, lies Sylvania, the most ill-famed region in the whole Empire. This land of bleak hills, blasted moorlands, and mist-shrouded forests is shunned by all sensible travellers. No sane man would venture forth after dark, and no questing knight or weary pilgrim ever accepts shelter within the brooding, rotting castles that tower over the land. By night, the brutish peasants of the squalid villages lock and bar their doors, and hang bundles of witchbane and demon's root over their shuttered windows, in the vain hope that these protective herbs will ward them against those who haunt the night. Wizards claim that the wind of dark magic blows strong in Sylvania, and that the keeps of the nobility are built over particularly ill-omened and evilly aspected sites. Even the notoriously brutal and fearless tax collectors of the elect Count of Stirland wear amulets blessed by the priests of Mor and Sigmar, Mor being the god of death and Sigmar being the first ever emperor and now god, which is convenient, and go about in companies 50 strong when their lord compels them to seek his due there. For as long as any man can remember, evil tales have been told in Sylvania. The odds are good that if ever a tavern bard is reciting a grisly ballad, or a court poet describing a story of horror, then the setting will be this dire place. There are more dark legends concerning Sylvania than any other imperial provinces put together, and most of these tales contain a solid kernel of truth. This is indeed a land where unquiet spirits, thirsty vampires, and evil sorcerers still walk beneath the moon's pale light. Only the bravest and most foolhardy would wander there, and only with the most compelling of purposes. The oldest recorded incidents of the evil nature of the place dates back to the Great Plague of 1111, when it is said that the rat-like Skaven feared to venture into the Sylvanian forests for fear of the undead armies that stalked the land. It is said that on the night of Geheimnisnacht, which is kind of like I covered it in one of the previous videos. If you want to hear about all the holidays, there's I think it's episode something .5. You'll be able to get a rundown of all the holidays. So yeah, go see about Geheimnisnacht there, because off the top of my head I can't remember what that is. I think it's one of the equinoxes. But anyway, so Morslaib pulsed with emerald witchlight, and a hail of incandescent meteors rained down on Sylvania. Astrologers and soothsayers prophesied catastrophe. This starfall was indeed a sign of ill omen. It was in 1111 that the dead first walked in Sylvania. Rotting corpses, marked with the black blotches of the plague, refused to stay in their graves. Dead fathers came back to claim their children. Even the ghouls fled from overflowing cemeteries and carnal houses, whose inhabitants would not stay at peace. Soon armies of decomposing corpses shambled about the land, needing only a will to guide them. They found it in the form of Frederick van Hal, whose name would become corrupted by later generations to Van Hal. He bound the great undead host to his will and conquered the land that would later become known as Sylvania. He built his keep at Van Heldenschloss. Van Heldenschloss, there we go. The ruined site of which is still shunned to this day. In the time of the death, the Empire writhed under the fury talons of Skaven oppression, and only the evil Ratman contained the expansion of Van Hal's necromantic domain. The Skaven and the undead expended their strength in a long and futile war that was eventually to cause the downfall of both. Van Hal was assassinated by his ambitious apprentice, Lothar von Dial, who was himself driven out of Van Heldenschloss by a band of knights apparently led by his master's ghost. After von Dial's disappearance, lacking a guiding intelligence, the undead armies wandered the land aimlessly, slaughtering the living, but being destroyed piecemeal by their human, Skaven, and Orc opponents. It took many centuries for the Empire to recover from the ravages of the Black Plague. Sylvania never really did. The population was reduced to a tenth of what it once had been, and the incidence of mutation and disease was many times greater than anywhere else in the Empire. In addition, forever after the Great Plague, the dead of Sylvania showed an uncomfortable tendency not to stay buried. The problem accounts for the infamous Sylvanian custom of burying corpses face down in their coffins, so that they would try to dig their way out. They would burrow downward. In the years following the Great Plague, Sylvania acquired a terrible reputation. The peasants became a byword for closed-mouthed sulliness and stupidity. The thin soil of its fields produced fewer crops than anywhere else in the Empire. Famine and blight were common. Few merchants traded in the area, for there was little money to be made. Only the most desperate of outlaws led in its profitless and haunted forests. The ruling house of the Von Drack was thin-blooded, decadent and lazy, half-hearted in the pursuit of their feudal duties, and had a history of congenital idiocy and insanity. It is said they were the only house in the Empire not to send at least one son to the Crusades in Araby. The rest of the nobles of the region were little better. Many were evil-hearted, oppressive and thoroughly corrupt men, little better than bandits, who fought and raided amongst each other with no respect for higher authority. The remainder were ineffectual cowards with no taste for war or other noble pursuits. And isn't war just so noble? Oh. Sylvania became a backwater shunned by the rest of mankind, and in its shadowy corners dreadful things went about their business unhindered. Like a magnet, it drew evil sorcerers who could pursue their study of dark magic undisturbed by the authorities. Occasionally, word of dark deeds drew the attention of witch hunters, or one of the ferocious Templar orders, and the woods were scoured, a process which the local nobility neither helped nor hindered. Otherwise, the slow growth of the powers of evil in the land went unchecked. This eventually caused Grand Theogenist Jurgen VI to call for a crusade against Sylvania. Unfortunately, this was the time of the three emperors, when there were three separate claimants of the imperial throne, and the empire was too fragmented to respond, so the Von Dracks maintained their ineffectual rule of the blighted land. The nadir of this dark period came centuries later, when Vlad von Carstein took over the rulership of Sylvania. So, yeah, we've already wiped out Vlad in this campaign, I'm afraid, but let's talk about him anyway, I mean, now, because you want to hear about him, right? He's a cool dude. So, the tale of how the first of the infamous vampire counts came to power is a cruel one. It began on the storm-lashed night when Otto, last of the mad Van Drack counts, lay on his deathbed, cursing all the gods that he was without a male heir. Otto swore he would marry his daughter Isabella, within his hated brother Leopold inherit. He had already refused the hand of every noble in Sylvania, for he despised them all, and no one of high blood from outside the region wanted to marry an heiress from that land. Otto was an evil man, given to putting the heads of peasants on a spike at the slightest provocation, and when mad with drink, he was convinced he was Sigmar reincarnated. The nobles, who should have been his liegemen, had no respect for his authority, and paid no attention to his commands. All of Sylvania seethed with civil strife. On his deathbed, the dying man lay unrepentant and cursed all the gods. Outside, the thunder rumbled and lightning split. The storm-black darkness. Victor Gutman, the aged priest of Sigmar, who had been called to shrive the old count, fainted dead away. Then, from out of the storm came the sound of wheels. A great black coach drew up outside the keep, and a heavy hand smote the door, a ringing blow, and a cold, proud voice demanded entry. The castle gate swung open on its hinges before any man-at-arms could touch it, and the visitor was revealed. The dog ceased to howl and slunk away. The stranger was tall, dark, and proud, of noble bearing and aspect. No one stayed his entry, and he marched to the count's chamber. His accent was foreign, perhaps from Kislev, and he recited the noble antecedents to the count, and claimed Otto's daughter's hand. Looking into the stranger's coldly glowing eyes, the count perhaps regretted his rash oath, but he could deny the stranger nothing. The priest was roused and performed the marriage ceremony before the dying man's bed. Then Otto expired, leaving his daughter in the charge of Vlad von Carstein. The new count's first act was to heave the protesting Leopold through the window of the highest tower of Castle Drakenhof. Vlad seemed as eccentric as old Otto. He never ate in the servants' presence. He never walked abroad by day. He dismissed the priest and sent him away from the village. No one ever saw Victor Gutman again. Soon, many of the old servants at the keep were dismissed, and mysterious swarthy strangers from the east took their place. However, the new count seemed less oppressive than the old one, and so the folk got on with their daily business, ignoring the hooded and cloaked foreigners that often visited the castle. Years of Von Drack rule had taught them not to question the deeds of their betters. At least the new count didn't order senseless executions for his pleasure, or demand the exorbitant taxes the old one had. No one doubted the count's prowess in battle either. When the company of Bernhof the Butcher rode into town and demanded tribute, the Count cut the mercenary down as if he were a stripling. Although he were a stripling? What's a stripling? Someone wants to comment what a stripling is, please do. Although Bernhoff was a famed warrior, he then proceeded to slaughter the entire mercenary band while his bodyguard watched, taking no part in the bloodbath. The Count's popularity was assured. Within his realm, the laws were kept, the guilty were punished, and bandits were kept down. Word reached the village that Isabella had fallen sick with an incurable illness and was slowly wasting away. One of the physicians who tended her claimed her heart had stopped and that she had died. The new Count said this was not so. He dismissed the learned doctors, claiming he would care for her with his own hands. 3 days later, she appeared in front of her folk, saying she was fully recovered, and it appeared to be so, although she was ever afterwards pale and wan, and never left her chambers save by night. So that's basically in reference to the blood kiss, right? So clearly he'd you know, turned her into a vampire, essentially. So she had died, but then was, you know, reborn as a vampire. But there's a lot of different tellings. There's a lot of fluff in later editions where basically she fell ill, and that's what made him finally, you know, decide to give her the blood kiss. But in this one, it seems to imply that she'd already been given the blood kiss, which is the term for, you know, biting someone and then turning into a vampire, right? But it takes a few days for that to happen, where they essentially, their mortal body dies, and they're replaced by, you know, their vampire cells. But there are a few different versions where basically he refused to turn her into a vampire for ages, despite the fact she knew about it and wanted to join him, you know, as a vampire. But there's a lot of different tellings where either she fell ill because, you know, she seemed to fall ill because she'd received the blood kiss, or he gave her the blood kiss because she was already ill and he was too in love with her to let her die, and so finally granted her the blood kiss. So different tellings. It changes from edition to edition, but I like to think they're all kind of real, because depending on people's perspective, they could both be true. So I kind of like that. It doesn't necessarily negate one thing or the other, or reinforce one thing or the other. You know, it's interesting. I really like that in terms of how the fluff sort of evolved to give extra details that don't necessarily counter things. It could just be a difference in perspective. So anyway, that's probably enough of me waffling about that. So, at first, none of the feuding nobles of Sylvania paid any heed to the command of the new Count. They were too wrapped up in their own bloody quarrels and rivalries to listen to the edicts of one they saw as a usurper. If this bothered Vlad von Carstein, he gave no sign of it. He calmly proceeded to rebuild estates which had suffered from centuries of neglect. A farmer who had newly inherited a herd of cattle could not have paid more attention to the running of his lands. He cherished his tenants as a peasant family cherishes a beast they are fattening for the midsummer feast. After decades of rule by Mad Otto, this was all welcomed. Soon, however, dark things began to happen. Young girls and lads from the villages began to disappear. Armies of the undead gathered. These were small forces at first, and they did not attack any of the Count's possessions, but harried those who disobeyed his authority. If the undead did not get the rebellious Sylvanians, then they fell victim to strange accidents. Baron Heis Rothermeier was eaten by wolves. Baron Peter Kaplan was found dead in his rooms, his eyes open wide, his hair pure white. He had died of stark terror. His wife went mad and passed away soon afterwards. The bandit lord, Boris Earbiter, was found hanging upside down from a tree, his body entirely drained of blood. Only those who had sworn fealty to Vlad von Carstein seemed immune to these depredations. Soon, the renegade nobles were queuing to swear fealty to him. Within 10 years, with no apparent application of military force, von Carstein was more firmly in control of unruly Sylvania than many electors were of their states. Years blurred by. Generations of peasants were born and died in Drakenhof, and still Vlad and Isabella von Carstein ruled, apparently unchanged by the years. At first, few paid any attention to their longevity. The lives of peasants had always been nasty, brutish, and short, and nobles had always enjoyed vastly longer lifespans. However, when the oldest woman in Drakenhof claimed that her grandmother had been a girl when von Carstein came to the throne, Even the dim-witted and illiterate peasantry of Sylvania began to surmise that all was not as it seemed. More and more witch hunters were drawn to Sylvania. Those who chose to investigate von Carstein were never seen again. Worse was to come. The disease which had first laid Isabella von Carstein low began to strike other noble families allied with the Count. Soon, every castle in Sylvania was home to long-lived nocturnal folk. The number of the living who went missing became increasingly noticeable. The temples to Sigmar were closed, watch posts were set up along the border, and few were allowed to pass. More than any other state in the divided empire, Sylvania became a land apart. On Gehemschnacht, in the year 2010, after the birth of Sigmar, so that's 2010 years after the nightmarish truth about Vlad von Carstein was revealed as he stood on the battlements of Drakenhof Keep, and intoned a terrible incarnation from the pages of the 9 books of Nagash. Across the land, the undead stirred. Skeletons clawed their way through the soft Sylvanian soil. Zombies stirred in their crypts. Ghouls raced to greet their new master. Von Carstein had thrown down the gauntlet to the 3 emperors. The war of the vampire counts had begun. The Sylvanian armies headed northwest, driving for Talabheim, capital of the Ottilia, one of the 3 claimants for the imperial throne. I think the other ones were in Altdorf and Nuln, I believe. Or was it Mindenheim and Nuln? I'd have to look that up. There's a lot of history in Warhammer. I can't know it all off the top of my head. Yeah, I'm not Wonder Woman. So the Sylvanian armies headed northwest, driving for Talabheim. I've already read that bit. Anyway, the peasant levies marched alongside their masters, fighting for them, as they would for any other overlord. These degenerates were accompanied by ghouls and wights, and other darker things. At the Battle of Essen Ford, they crushed the Ottilia's armies, routing the human force. Before the battle, von Carstein had promised the humans clemency if they surrendered, and no mercy if they opposed him. He was good as his word. His followers executed every captive, and von Carstein reanimated their bodies. As he watched his men slaughtered, the Ottilia's general, Hans Schliffen, became so incensed that he flew into a berserker rage, broke free from his captors, seized the Count's own enchanted sword and struck off his head. For his pains, he was torn limb from limb by the Count's followers. The remaining vampires took to squabbling among themselves to see who would take von Carstein's place. Hermann Posner finally prevailed on the others. However, that very night, as he strutted at the head of the army, von Carstein returned. Posner claimed it was a trick, and von Carstein cut him down. This was not the first time this elusive Count would come back from the dead. So, stubborn guy is not Manfred, Vlad von Carstein. At the Battle of Schwarzhofen, which I think means, is it Black Haven? I think, in German. Vlad was cut down by Derek Kruger, leader of the Knights of the White Wolf. God, I love the Knights of the White Wolf. I've got the miniatures of them, and they're not in the game yet, and that really saddened me. But anyway, and the army of Sylvania was defeated by the forces of the Elector of Mindenheim. Yet within a year, Vlad von Carstein was leading another army, and Kruger's smashed and bloodless body was found at the foot of the Mindenheim spire. At the field of Bluthof, von Carstein fell with 5 lances through his body, and the Count of Ostland's runefang blade lodged in his heart. That's a runefang, right? That is like, you get cut by a runefang, you're dead, right? Those things are tough. You know, that's proper dwarven, you know, rune-forged Gromril sword. It's a good sword. So the fact that he had one of them through his heart, that's enough to take anything down. But 3 days later, he was seen ordering the crucifixion of prisoners outside the town gates. At Bogenhofen Bridge, Bogenhofen is a little bit south of Altdorf. It's on the bridge towards, it's on the road towards Helmgart. I just know that off the top of my head, isn't that fun? Anyway, not in the game, I'm afraid, but yeah, Bogenhofen. The Bogenhofen Bridge, a lucky cannon shot took von Carstein's head off. Again, cannon to the head, you know, it's pretty big deal. Within the hour, the cannon crew were dead, and the village was being overrun. The soldiers of the Empire were gripped with terror in the face of so seemingly invincible a foe. By the winter of 2051, the Sylvanians laid siege to Altdorf itself. The city had been surrounded by a ditch edged with sharpened stakes. on the city wall side. The Reich had been redirected into the ditch to give the city a moat of fast-flowing water. None of the precautions taken by the defenders worked. They did not stop the Sylvanians. Screaming skulls lobbed by catapults built on of bone terrified the citizens. Great siege engines built of fused human remains lumbered forwards, animated by dark magic. Carrion birds flapped slowly overhead. So, nice thing to point out here is carrion birds, not a vampire count unit anymore. That's a Tomb King's unit, as are the Screaming Skull catapults. But of course, they were just part of the undead roster, so why wouldn't Vlad have those, right? But you know, maybe he didn't have those in more recent iterations. Although, you know, how cool is that? A big catapult throwing Screaming Skulls. He does sort of have those on the battlements in these siege battles, so you know, maybe it's still possible. Von Carstein gave his usual ultimatum. Open the gates of the city and serve him while living, or fight on and serve him in death. The entire population, including Ludwig, the claimant to the imperial throne, wanted to surrender, but the Grand Theogenist Wilhelm III convinced him not to. He ventured within the great temple of Sigmar, and after 3 days of fasting and prayer, emerged claiming that Sigmar had revealed the salvation of the Empire to him. He knew the source of Von Carstein's immortality. That day, he dispatched an agent to the Vampire Count's camp. His name was Felix Mann, and he was the greatest thief of his age. He had been offered a pardon and laid under a Geas, G-E-A-S, Geas, by the Grand Theogenist. He must steal the Vampire Count's ring by stealth and trickery. Mann made his way to the heart of the Sylvanian camp. Heart in mouth, he entered the great black silk pavilion where the undead aristocrats lay sleeping in their open coffins. So vampire, isn't it? Just typical vampires. Such was their confidence that no one stood guard. Mann slipped the ring from the Von Carstein's finger and fled, not returning to Altdorf. No one knows what became of him and the Carstein ring. When he woke, Vlad von Carstein was enraged. He ordered an immediate attack on the city. The undead army surged forward. Great siege towers of bone wheeled to the walls. On the battlements of Altdorf, the defenders stood ready. Halberdiers pushed the siege ladders away, and dozens of undead fell, limbs flailing slowly to the ground. Skeletons and swordsmen hacked at each other across the battlements. Imperial heroes, armed with formidable magical weapons, cut down the vampire aristocrats, and were themselves cut down. So, yeah, as you can see, I'm just saving my Let's Play here. That's, that's the end of this episode, basically. So we'll find out how that battle went in the next one, because there's still a lot more to talk about the vampire counts. I've been talking about a lot of the history, which I haven't really done a lot in the campaign lore play. I've been doing them in the extra ones mostly. But I think with the vampire counts, especially in Total War, Vlad's back. He's supposed to be dead when this game is happening, but like properly dead. Although he does come back from time to time anyway, but that's depending on the story. Like in the end times he comes back, but forget the end times. So the fact he's alive again and ruling his own faction at the moment, it's worth talking about him, I think, in the context of how he came to be. I think that history is important for his character. So I wanted to cover that. So yeah, so we've gone on too long. So guys, if you enjoyed this video, please do comment, like, and subscribe. It all really helps the channel out. And yeah, there's some fun things coming. I've got some collaborative projects coming. So there's some other YouTubers getting involved with my battle replays. So that'll be really good fun. So expect that this week before the next campaign video. And guys, yeah. So again, comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Okay? Take care, guys.